The cargo hold smelled like old metal and fear. It was the kind of smell that stuck to everything, the walls, the floor, even the air itself. In the corner of this miserable space sat Princess Kira of the Veltha Empire, completely still on the freezing metal ground. Her wrists were wrapped in chains that glowed with a weird, sickly light. These weren't normal chains. They pulsed with energy that made the air around them shimmer. The smugglers wouldn't shut up about those chains. For the past 6 hours, they'd been drinking cheap alcohol and bragging to anyone who'd listen. "You know what these are made from?" the captain had said earlier, his breath reeking of liquor. He'd stumbled over to where Kira sat, waving his bottle around like he was showing off a prize trophy. "Collapsed star matter. You know what that means? That means the core of a dead star, compressed down and forged into these beauties. Cost me 3 years of profits to get my hands on them." His crew had laughed. One of them, a thin man with scars across his face, had added, "Quantum locked too. Specifically designed to hold Veltha. All that psychic power of yours? Useless. These chains shut it down completely." The captain had leaned closer to Kira, so close she could see the yellow stains on his teeth. "Strongest material in the entire galaxy, princess. Your little mind tricks won't work through these. Nobody's breaking these chains. Nobody." Kira hadn't responded. She'd learned days ago that talking to these people was pointless. They didn't see her as a person. To them, she was just cargo. Valuable cargo that would make them rich when they delivered her to the Krell Consortium. But the chains were doing more than just holding her. They were slowly killing her. Where the glowing metal touched her skin, dark burn marks had formed. Her scales, normally a beautiful shade of deep blue, had turned black around her wrists. The burns were spreading, creeping up her arms like some kind of infection. The pain was constant, a burning sensation that never stopped, not even for a second. Kira had tried not to think about what came next. She knew exactly where these smugglers were taking her. The Krell Consortium wasn't interested in keeping her alive for long. They wanted to study her brain, to figure out how Veltha's psychic abilities worked. They'd cut her open on some sterile table while scientists took notes. Then they'd use what they learned to create weapons. Psychic weapons that could control minds, break wills, turn entire populations into slaves. Her death wouldn't just be her death. It would doom thousands of her people. The Veltha Empire had tried to find her. Kira knew they had. Her father, the Emperor, would have sent their best warriors the moment he realized she'd been taken. But she also knew they'd failed. These chains had a reputation across the galaxy. They'd been used before on captured Veltha prisoners. Rescue attempts had been made by warriors from 12 different species, some of the strongest beings in known space. Every single attempt had failed. The chains had never been broken. Not once. Not ever. Kira shifted slightly, trying to find a position that hurt less. It was impossible. The cold metal floor made her bones ache. The chains made her skin burn. And the knowledge of what was coming made her heart heavy with a sadness that felt like drowning. She'd been a prisoner for 9 days now. The smugglers had grabbed her during a diplomatic mission to a neutral trading station. They'd used some kind of neural disruptor to knock her out before she could defend herself. When she'd woken up, she was already in these chains, already on this ship, already doomed. The worst part was the silence. Veltha were social beings. They lived in communities, connected through their psychic abilities, always sensing each other's presence. But these chains cut her off from everything. She couldn't feel her people anymore. Couldn't reach out to her father or her sisters. Couldn't even sense the emotions of the smugglers who kept her trapped. She was completely, utterly alone. The ship suddenly shook, a violent shudder that ran through the entire vessel. Kira heard the engines make a grinding sound that definitely wasn't normal. The lights flickered. Somewhere in the distance, an alarm started beeping. The smugglers started yelling. Their boots pounded on the metal floors as they ran toward the cockpit. Kira heard fragments of their panicked conversation through the walls. "Engines failing. Told you we should have gotten it serviced. 3 more jumps to the delivery point. Need a mechanic now." The ship shuddered again, harder this time. Kira felt it drop out of faster-than-light travel with a lurch that made her stomach flip. Through the small window in the cargo hold, she saw they were approaching a space station. It was small, probably one of those frontier outposts that existed on the edge of civilized space. The kind of place where people didn't ask too many questions. The docking procedure was rough. The ship jerked and bumped as it connected to the station. Kira heard the magnetic clamps engage with a series of loud clangs. The captain was still yelling at his crew. "It's the middle of the night. What mechanic is going to work at this hour?" There's always someone, another voice said. Outposts like this, there's always some loner who'll work for the right price. Fine. Find them. Get them here. And make sure they don't ask questions. What about the cargo? What about it? Lock the hold. Tell the mechanic to fix the engines and get out. Simple. Footsteps approached the cargo hold door. Kira heard the lock engage with a heavy click. Then the footsteps retreated. Silence fell over the ship. The smugglers had probably gone to sleep, confident that their prisoner wasn't going anywhere. And they were right. Kira wasn't going anywhere. The chains made sure of that. She leaned her head back against the cold wall and closed her eyes. 2 days, maybe less, until the radiation poisoning from the chains killed her. 3 more jumps until they reached the consortium. Either way, her time was running out. But somewhere on this station, a mechanic was waking up. A human mechanic who worked strange hours and didn't ask questions. Someone who had no idea that in a few hours, he'd walk onto this ship and everything would change. For both of them. Tom Hayes rubbed his greasy hands on an old rag and glanced at the clock mounted on the wall of his repair bay. The numbers glowed back at him, 3:47 a.m. Most people on Outpost Kalos were sound asleep at this hour, dreaming whatever dreams came to people who still had normal lives. Tom wasn't most people. Sleep had become a stranger to him years ago. These days, he worked instead. It was easier that way. When his hands were busy fixing things, his mind didn't have time to wander into dark places. When he was elbow deep in engine components and fuel lines, he didn't have to think about the past. About the things he'd lost. About the people who weren't coming back. His repair bay looked like an organized disaster. Tools hung on every available wall space. Half-finished projects sat on workbenches, waiting for parts or motivation or both. Salvaged components were stacked in corners, things Tom had pulled from dead ships and kept because you never knew when you'd need a working plasma regulator or a functional coolant pump. In the galaxy, waste was expensive. Tom had learned to fix, rebuild, and reuse everything. In the corner, his maintenance drone sat on its charging station. Tom had found it in a scrap heap 2 years ago, barely functioning. Most people would have stripped it for parts. Tom had spent 3 months rebuilding it instead. Now it followed him around the bay, handing him tools and keeping him company in the long, quiet hours. Another night, another ship, Tom said to the drone, not really expecting an answer. He'd gotten used to talking to himself. When you lived alone and worked alone, conversations with machines started to feel almost normal. The drone beeped back at him, a soft, chirping sound. Tom had programmed its responses carefully, making them sound sympathetic, almost understanding. It was pathetic, maybe, but it beat total silence. His communication console suddenly lit up with an incoming docking request. Tom walked over and checked the screen. A ship was coming in hot, engines clearly struggling. The vessel looked like a typical smuggler's rig, nothing fancy, lots of modifications, the kind of ship that changed its registration codes more often than its oil. Tom knew what these people were. He knew they weren't hauling legal cargo. But he'd stopped caring about things like that a long time ago. On Outpost Kalos, you didn't ask questions. You took the work, fixed what needed fixing, collected your credits, and moved on. Questions led to getting involved. Getting involved led to caring about people. And caring about people led to the kind of pain that woke you up screaming at 3 in the morning. Tom had experienced enough pain for one lifetime. He grabbed his toolbox, a heavy metal case covered in dents and scratches from years of use. Inside, he had everything he needed for most common repairs. Plasma welders, diagnostic scanners, various sized wrenches, wire cutters, and about 50 other tools he'd collected over the years. The toolbox had traveled with him from Earth, survived the colony days, and made it through everything that came after. It was one of the few things from his old life he'd kept. The smuggler's ship clanked into the docking bay with all the grace of a drunk elephant. Tom heard the magnetic clamps engage, followed by the hiss of the airlock pressurizing. He walked over, toolbox in hand, and waited. The airlock door opened, and 3 men stepped out. They had that look, the hard eyes, the confident swagger, the visible weapons hanging from their belts. The captain led the way, a thick-built man with a scar running down the left side of his face. His 2 crew members flanked him, hands resting casually near their guns. Tom had seen 1,000 versions of these guys. They thought carrying weapons made them scary. They thought their tough guy routine impressed people. Tom just saw customers who needed their engine fixed. "You the mechanic?" the captain asked, looking Tom up and down like he was evaluating livestock. "That's what the sign says," Tom replied, keeping his voice neutral. "Engines failing." Keeps cutting out during jumps. We need it fixed fast. The captain stepped closer, trying to use his size to intimidate. And here's the deal. You fix it fast, you don't ask any questions about our cargo or where we're going, and we'll pay you double your normal rate. Tom met his eyes without flinching. Double rate works. When do you need it done? Now. We've got a schedule to keep. I'll need to see the engine first. Can't promise anything until I know what's wrong. The captain nodded and stepped aside. Fine. But understand something, mechanic. You work on the engine. That's it. You don't wander around the ship. You don't look at anything that's not your business. You stay in the engine room, you fix what's broken, and you get out. Clear? Crystal clear, Tom said. He'd heard this speech before. Ships like this always had something to hide. Good. The captain gestured toward the airlock. Let's go. Tom followed them onto the ship. The interior matched the exterior, old, heavily modified, maintained just well enough to keep flying but nothing more. The corridors were narrow, lit by flickering lights that probably needed replacing. The air had that recycled smell that came from life support systems running too long without proper maintenance. They walked past several closed doors. Tom heard sounds from behind some of them, voices, machinery, the usual noises of a working vessel. One of the crew members kept looking back at him, making sure he wasn't paying too much attention to anything. Tom wasn't. He'd learned to look without seeming to look. But more than that, he genuinely didn't care what these people were smuggling. Drugs, weapons, stolen goods, none of it mattered to him. He was here to fix an engine, get paid, and go back to his lonely repair bay. That was the routine. That was the safe way to live. They reached the engine room, and the captain pushed open the door. There. Fix it. We'll be in the cockpit. Come find us when you're done. Tom stepped inside, and they sealed the door behind him. He stood there for a moment, taking in the mess. The engine room was a disaster. Coolant was leaking from at least 3 different places. The plasma coils were misaligned. Someone had done amateur repair work that had only made things worse. Wires were patched with tape instead of proper connectors. The whole setup looked like it was held together by luck and desperation. Going to be a long night, Tom muttered, setting down his toolbox. He got to work, starting with the diagnostics. He pulled out his scanner and began checking systems, tracing the problems back to their sources. The main issue was in the coolant distribution system. Someone had installed a cheap replacement part that couldn't handle the stress of faster-than-light jumps. It was failing, causing the engine to overheat and shut down as a safety measure. Tom lost himself in the work. This was what he was good at. Machines made sense. They broke in predictable ways. They could be fixed with the right tools and enough patience. Unlike people, unlike life, machines followed rules. He'd been working for about an hour when he heard it. Someone was humming. The sound drifted through the ship's ventilation system, faint but clear. It was a melody, strange, alien, nothing Tom had ever heard before. But something about it made him stop working. Made him straighten up and listen. The tune reminded him of something. Someone. A memory he'd spent 3 years trying to bury. His daughter used to hum like that. Different melody, but the same soft, gentle sound. She'd hum while drawing pictures at the kitchen table. She'd hum while helping him in the workshop. She'd hum right up until the day everything fell apart. Tom's hands started shaking. He gripped his wrench tighter, trying to focus on the engine. Trying not to think about the past. But the humming continued, floating through the ship like a ghost. He told himself to ignore it. To finish the job and get out. To stick to the routine that kept him safe from feeling anything. But his feet were already moving, following the sound through the corridors, toward something he didn't understand yet. Toward a cargo hold where everything was about to change. Tom tightened the last connection on the coolant line and ran one final diagnostic check. The scanner showed green across the board. The engine was fixed. It had taken him almost 2 hours, but the ship would make its jumps without any problems now. He wiped his hands on his rack, packed up his tools, and headed back toward the airlock. The captain was waiting there with one of his crew members. Both looked tired and irritable, probably wanting to get back to sleep. The captain didn't say anything, just transferred the credits to Tom's account, double the normal rate, as promised. The transaction was anonymous, untraceable. That's how these people operated. You're done. Get out, the captain said, already turning away. Tom nodded and stepped off the ship. The airlock door hissed shut behind him with a solid clang. He started walking back across the docking bay toward his repair bay, his boots echoing in the empty space. His toolbox felt heavier than usual, or maybe he was just tired. The station was completely quiet at this hour. Most people were asleep in their quarters, getting rest before another day of whatever work kept them on this forgotten outpost. Tom should have felt relieved. Another job done. More credits in his account. Back to his routine, back to his safe, isolated life where nothing touched him and nothing hurt him. But he couldn't stop thinking about what he'd seen in that cargo hold. He'd found the source of the humming about halfway through his repairs. Curiosity had gotten the better of him, and he'd followed the sound to a locked cargo hold. The door had a small window, and through it, he'd seen her. A woman, though not human, sitting on the cold floor, wrapped in chains that glowed with an eerie light. Her skin was covered in scales that looked burned and infected where the metal touched her. She'd been humming softly to herself, a sad melody that reminded him so much of his daughter that it physically hurt to hear it. Their eyes had met through that window. She hadn't called for help. Hadn't begged. Just looked at him with ancient, tired eyes that said she already knew how this story ended. Then one of the smugglers had appeared, grabbed Tom roughly by the shoulder, and dragged him back to the engine room with a warning to mind his own business. Tom had finished the repairs without saying another word. He'd taken his payment and left. That should have been the end of it. But now, walking through the empty station at 5:15 in the morning, Tom couldn't make his feet keep moving forward. He stopped in the middle of the docking bay, standing there like an idiot, staring at nothing. The station was dead quiet. Almost everyone would be asleep right now. The smugglers were probably already in their bunks, confident that their cargo was secure. Confident that nobody on this backwater station would dare interfere with their business. Tom thought about the woman in the cargo hold. Alone. Dying. Those burns on her skin had looked serious. The way she'd been sitting there, so still and resigned, like she'd already accepted her fate. How long did she have? Days? Hours? He thought about his daughter. About the last time he'd seen her face. She'd been smiling, excited about something. He couldn't even remember what anymore. Just that she'd been happy. And then everything had gone wrong so fast. The colony's life support failure. The panic. The chaos. Tom had tried to reach her, tried to get to the shelter where the children were supposed to be safe. But he'd been too late. By the time he'd gotten there, by the time he'd torn through the rubble with his bare hands until they bled, it was already over. He'd failed to save her. Failed to save his wife. Failed to save anyone that mattered. Tom had spent 3 years telling himself that getting involved only led to pain. That caring about people only gave the universe more ways to hurt you. That the smart thing, the safe thing, was to keep his head down, do his work, and not let anyone or anything matter to him ever again. And it had worked. He'd been numb for 3 years. Functional but hollow. Alive but not really living. But standing there in that quiet docking bay, Tom realized something. The numbness hadn't protected him from pain. It had just turned him into a ghost. He was already dead inside. What did he have to lose? Damn it, Tom whispered to the empty air. He turned around and started walking back toward the smuggler's ship. His heart was pounding now. This was stupid. This was incredibly, monumentally stupid. These were dangerous people. They had weapons. They had a crew. Tom was just one guy with a toolbox. If they caught him trying to free their cargo, they'd probably kill him. But his feet kept moving anyway. The airlock was still open. The smugglers had gotten lazy, or maybe they were just confident. Nobody on Outpost Kalos had the guts to cross people like them. The station's security was minimal, mostly just automated systems. The kind of place where everyone minded their own business because that's how you survived. Tom stepped onto the ship for the second time that night. Everything was quiet now. He could hear the hum of the life support systems, the occasional creak of the hull settling. Somewhere deeper in the ship, someone was snoring. He moved carefully, stepping lightly, keeping close to the walls. The corridor felt longer this time. Every shadow looked like it might hide one of the crew members. Every sound made him freeze, waiting to see if he'd been discovered. But nobody appeared. The smugglers were all asleep, dreaming whatever dreams came to people who made their living trafficking in misery. Tom reached the cargo hold. The door was locked now, they'd secured it after he'd been caught looking inside earlier. A basic electronic lock, the kind that was supposed to keep out casual thieves. Tom had fixed hundreds of ships over the years. He'd installed locks like this, repaired them, replaced them. He knew exactly how they worked. He pulled out a small multi-tool from his pocket and carefully removed the access panel next to the door. Inside were the lock circuit boards and wiring. Tom traced the connections with his eyes, identifying the power supply and the control mechanism. It took him about 30 seconds to bypass the lock. The door clicked softly as it unlocked. Tom paused, his hand on the door handle. This was his last chance to walk away. To go back to his repair bay, forget what he'd seen, and return to his safe, numb existence. Nobody would blame him. Nobody would even know. But he could still hear that humming in his memory. Could still see those resigned, tired eyes looking at him through the window. Tom pushed the door open and stepped inside. The woman looked up, surprise flickering across her face. She'd probably expected to die in this cargo hold. Expected her next visitor to be a Krell scientist with a scalpel. She definitely hadn't expected the human mechanic to come back. "You shouldn't be here," she said softly. Her voice had an accent Tom couldn't place, musical and strange. "Yeah, I'm getting that feeling," Tom replied. He approached the chains, kneeling down to examine them up close. They were like nothing he'd ever seen before. The metal seemed to shift and shimmer, energy pulsing through it in waves. Where they touched her skin, the burns looked even worse than he'd thought. Deep, infected, spreading. "These are killing you," Tom said. "They're designed to," she answered. "I have perhaps 2 days before the radiation poisoning finishes the job. Though I suspect I'll be delivered to my buyers before then." "The Krell?" She nodded. "You know what they do." "I've heard stories." Everyone had heard stories about the Krell Consortium. Medical experiments. Weapons development. The kind of people who saw other beings as raw materials for research. Nobody's tried to break these. The woman, Kira, he remembered the smugglers calling her, smiled sadly. "Many have tried. These chains are quantum-locked, forged from collapsed star matter. 12 species have sent their strongest warriors to free captured prisoners like me. All failed. The chains cannot be broken. Attempting to remove them without the proper authorization codes triggers an antimatter charge. We would both die instantly." Tom studied the chains more carefully, running his fingers along the links. He wasn't looking at them like a prison. He was looking at them like a mechanic looks at a machine. Every machine had stress points. Design flaws. Weaknesses. "These were made to hold your people," Tom said slowly. "Species that have been in space for thousands of years. Advanced civilizations with technology way beyond Earth's." "Yes," Kira said, confused about where he was going with this. "But humans are new to the galaxy. We've only been out here for what, a couple hundred years." Tom wrapped both hands around the chains, testing their weight and feel. "Human, what are you doing?" "Something really stupid." Tom planted his feet and tightened his grip. "You might want to close your eyes. This is probably going to be loud." The sound of the chains breaking was like thunder in a metal box. It echoed through every corridor of the ship, a massive crack followed by the tinkling of metal fragments hitting the floor. For a moment, Tom and Kira just stared at the shattered pieces scattered around them. The supposedly unbreakable restraints lay in ruins, still glowing faintly as their quantum locks failed and died. Tom's hands were shaking. He looked down at them like they belonged to someone else. The chains had resisted at first, grinding against his grip. Then something had shifted. The metal had groaned, twisted, and suddenly given way completely. It hadn't been gradual. It had been catastrophic. The chains hadn't just broken, they'd shattered into dozens of pieces. "How did you?" Kira whispered, staring at her freed wrists. The burns were still there, angry and red, but the chains were gone. She flexed her fingers experimentally, like she couldn't quite believe it was real. "I don't know," Tom admitted. His heart was hammering in his chest. "I just pulled and they..." That's when the alarm started screaming. Red lights flooded the cargo hold, spinning and flashing. A loud siren blared through the ship's speakers. Somewhere close by, Tom heard shouting. Then running footsteps. "Lots of them. We need to move," Tom said, helping Kira to her feet. She was weak, stumbling, her legs not quite working right after days of sitting in one position. The cargo hold door exploded inward before they could take 2 steps. The frame buckled and bent as the captain kicked it open with such force that the metal twisted. He rushed in first, his face twisted with rage. Behind him came the rest of his crew, 5 men, all armed with various weapons. Pistols. Energy rifles. One guy even had some kind of blade that crackled with electricity. But it was the thing that ducked through the doorway behind them that made Tom's blood run cold. The Krell enforcer had to bend almost double to fit through the door. When it straightened up inside the cargo hold, it stood at least 8 feet tall. Its body was covered in thick, armored plates that looked like stone but moved like muscle. 4 arms, each one thick as a tree trunk. Its face was just a flat surface with 2 glowing eyes and a mouth full of teeth that looked designed for tearing metal. "You just made the worst mistake of your life, mechanic," the captain snarled. His gun was pointed directly at Tom's chest. "Do you have any idea what you've done? That cargo was worth more than this entire station." Tom stepped between the smugglers and Kira. He didn't have a weapon. Didn't have armor. Didn't have a plan. His toolbox was back in the corner where he dropped it. All he had were his 2 hands and a stubborn refusal to watch someone else die while he stood there doing nothing. "Not again. Never again." "Let her go," Tom said. His voice was steadier than he expected. The captain laughed. It wasn't a nice sound. "Let her go? You think you're a hero now? You think because you broke some chains, you're going to save the day?" He gestured at his crew. "There are 6 of us. Plus our Krell friend here. And you're just one pathetic mechanic who should have minded his own business." "I'm giving you one chance," Tom said. "Walk away. Leave the station. I won't stop you. Won't stop us." The captain's face turned red. "You won't," he turned to the Krell enforcer. "Kill him. Slowly." The Krell roared. It was a sound that vibrated through Tom's chest, making his teeth rattle. The creature's species was legendary across the galaxy. They were used as enforcers, bodyguards, and soldiers because of their incredible strength. A Krell could crush duralloy, one of the strongest metals in common use, with their bare hands. They could rip through ship hulls. They could tear apart security doors. The enforcer charged. Despite its massive size, it moved fast. 3 long strides and it was on Tom, one huge fist swinging down in an arc that would have turned his head into paste. Tom's body moved on instinct. 3 years of working alone, lifting engine components that weighed hundreds of pounds. 3 years of moving ship parts that normally required mechanical assistance. 3 years of hard labor that had turned his body into something harder than it had been before. But more than that, Tom had grown up on Earth. And Earth's gravity was 1 g, stronger than most inhabited worlds in the galaxy. Humans evolved under that crushing weight, bones and muscles adapting to constant pressure that would exhaust other species. Every human who grew up on Earth was carrying around invisible weights that made them stronger than they looked. Tom's fist met the Krell's jaw with every ounce of strength he had. The impact made a sound like a hammer hitting concrete. The Krell's head snapped sideways. Its massive body, all 8 feet and several hundred pounds of armored muscle, lifted off the ground. It flew backwards, crashed into the cargo hold wall hard enough to dent the metal, and slid down to the floor in a heap. It didn't get up. The cargo hold went silent except for the alarms. Everyone stared at the unconscious Krell, then at Tom. The smugglers' weapons drooped slightly, their confidence shaken. Nobody moved. Tom's hand hurt like hell, but he didn't show it. He kept his eyes on the captain. "Anyone else?" Tom asked quietly. That's when Kira stood up. Without the chains suppressing her abilities, the princess's psychic power flooded the room like a wave of pressure. Tom felt it wash over him, not painful, but intense. Like standing too close to something vast and ancient. The air itself seemed to shimmer. But Kira didn't attack. Instead, she reached out with her mind and touched everyone present. Tom felt memories that weren't his own suddenly flash through his mind. He saw laboratories. Saw Kira's people strapped to tables while Krell scientists worked on them with gleaming instruments. Heard screaming. Saw bodies disposed of like garbage after the experiments were done. Saw plans for weapons that could control entire populations, turn soldiers into mindless slaves, break the will of anyone who resisted. He saw thousands of her people already dead. Saw the genocide being planned. Saw the Krell Consortium's true purpose, not research, but extermination and exploitation. The smugglers saw it too. Tom watched their faces go pale. Their weapons clattered to the floor. One of them bent over and vomited. Another one was crying, tears streaming down his face. The captain just stood there, his gun hanging limply from his hand, staring at nothing. "You were taking me to that," Kira said softly. Her voice carried weight now, power. "You were going to sell me to people who would do those things. For money." Station security burst into the cargo hold moments later, weapons ready. They'd responded to the alarms and the sounds of fighting. What they found was a scene that made no sense. Smugglers standing around in shock, their weapons on the floor. A massive Krell enforcer unconscious against the wall with a broken jaw. A woman covered in burns standing free of chains that lay shattered on the floor. And a human mechanic with bloody knuckles standing in the middle of it all. The security team's leader looked around, trying to piece together what had happened. Someone want to explain this? The smugglers started talking all at once, confessing everything. Where they'd taken Kira from. Who they were delivering her to. What the Krell Consortium was doing. They couldn't stop talking, the memories Kira had shared overwhelming their ability to keep secrets. Security arrested them all. Medical teams arrived to treat Kira's burns. Station administrators were called. Within an hour, messages were being sent to the Veltha Empire and the Galactic Council. Evidence was being gathered. The Krell Consortium's operations were about to be exposed. And through it all, people kept staring at Tom. At the human mechanic who'd broken chains that 12 species couldn't break. Who'd dropped a Krell enforcer with one punch. Who'd somehow done the impossible with nothing but his 2 hands. Tom just wanted to go back to his repair bay. He'd done what he'd come to do. Kira was free. The bad guys were caught. He'd lived through it somehow. That was enough. But as station security took his statement, as officials arrived asking questions, as news of what happened started spreading through Outpost Kalos and beyond, Tom realized something. His quiet, isolated life was over. And for the first time in 3 years, he wasn't sure if that was a bad thing. The news traveled fast. Faster than Tom could have imagined. Within hours, every major news network in the sector was running the story. Within a day, it had reached the core worlds. Within a week, the entire galaxy knew about the human mechanic who'd broken the unbreakable chains. Tom watched it all unfold from his repair bay, feeling like he was watching someone else's life. The news anchors kept showing security footage from the smuggler's ship. There was Tom, wrapping his hands around those glowing chains. Then the chains exploding into fragments. Then the Krell enforcer charging. Then Tom's fist connecting with the creature's jaw. They played that part over and over in slow motion, analyzing every detail. The reactions came from everywhere. Xenobiologists, scientists who studied alien species, started publishing emergency papers about human physiology. They'd always known humans came from a high-gravity world, but they'd never really thought about what that meant. Now they were scrambling to understand how Earth's 1G gravity had shaped human evolution. How human bones were denser than most species. How human muscle fibers could generate explosive force that other species needed mechanical assistance to match. One scientist on the news explained it like this: imagine growing up your entire life wearing a weighted vest. Every movement, every action, fighting against that constant pull. Then imagine taking that vest off. That's what happens when a human who grew up on Earth moves to a lower gravity environment. They don't feel lighter, they feel stronger. Because they are. Weapons manufacturers were having a collective panic attack. For centuries, they'd been designing security systems, restraints, and containment fields based on known species. They'd tested everything against Krell strength, against Veltha psychic abilities, against every powerful species in the galaxy. But humans were so new to the galactic stage that nobody had bothered including them in the testing. After all, humans weren't considered particularly strong or dangerous. That assumption had just been shattered along with those chains. Prison wardens across the galaxy started checking their facilities with new paranoia. If a human could break quantum lock chains, what else could they break? High-security installations began adding new protocols specifically for human prisoners. Some facilities even banned humans entirely until they could upgrade their containment systems. The galactic community was learning a humbling lesson: they'd underestimated humanity. Earth's brutal gravity, its harsh environment, its dangerous wildlife, all of it had forged humans into something tougher than the galaxy had expected. Humans weren't the strongest species. Weren't the smartest. Weren't the most advanced. But they were survivors who'd clawed their way up from the bottom of Earth's food chain, and that created a kind of strength that didn't show up on standard assessments. Tom tried to ignore all of it. He went back to work, fixing ships, keeping to himself. But it was impossible now. Ships that had never stopped at Outpost Kalos before were suddenly docking there. Captains who'd never needed a mechanic were inventing problems just to meet him. Some wanted to hire him as security. Others wanted to challenge him, to test if the stories were true. A few just wanted autographs. Tom turned them all away. He wasn't a fighter. Wasn't a hero. He was just a mechanic who'd done what felt right in the moment. The galaxy could make him into whatever legend they wanted, but that didn't change who he actually was. Then, 3 weeks after everything happened, a ship arrived that Tom couldn't ignore. It was beautiful in a way that made everything else in the docking bay look like garbage. Sleek lines, perfect construction, hull plating that shimmered with colors Tom didn't have names for. The ship carried diplomatic flags from the Veltha Empire, and when it landed, a whole entourage stepped out. Princess Kira was in the center of them, looking nothing like the dying prisoner Tom had seen in that cargo hold. Her burns had healed, leaving only faint scars. She wore clothes that probably cost more than Tom's entire repair bay. Her scales gleamed with health. But her eyes were the same, ancient and knowing. "Tom Hayes," she said, walking up to him while her guards and diplomats waited respectfully behind her. "I've come to thank you properly." "You already thanked me," Tom said. The station security had let her visit him briefly after everything went down, before she'd been taken for medical treatment. She'd thanked him then. That wasn't proper. That was just words. Kira smiled. "I'm here to offer you anything you desire. The Veltha Empire owes you a debt that can never truly be repaid. You saved not just my life, but potentially thousands of my people. Name your price. Wealth? We can make you richer than you can imagine. Status? We can give you a title, lands, position in our court. Power? We have technologies and resources that could make you one of the most influential beings in the galaxy." Tom looked at her, then at the grand ship behind her, then at his cluttered, greasy repair bay. He thought about what she was offering. Real money. A chance to leave this backwater station. A life that meant something to someone. But he also thought about why he'd saved her in the first place. It wasn't for a reward. It wasn't to become famous or powerful. It was because in that moment, doing nothing felt worse than the risk of getting involved. "I just want one thing," Tom said quietly. "There was a colony. Terra Nova 7. There was an accident there 3 years ago. My family was there. My wife, Amy. My daughter, Beth. I never got to. I never found where they—" He couldn't finish. The words stuck in his throat like broken glass. Kira's expression softened with understanding. "You want to know where they were laid to rest?" Tom nodded, not trusting his voice. "My people can find anything, anywhere," Kira said gently. "Our psychic abilities can trace resonances across the galaxy. I'll find them for you. And I'll take you there personally." 2 days later, Tom stood on the red dust of Terra Nova 7. The colony was still abandoned, a ghost town of empty buildings and broken dreams. Kira had used her abilities to locate the graves, a small memorial site where the survivors had buried the dead before evacuating. Tom knelt in front of 2 simple markers. Amy Hayes. Beth Hayes. His hands shook as he traced their names carved into the stone. "I couldn't save you," Tom whispered. "I tried. I ran as fast as I could. But I was too late. I'm always too late." Kira stood a respectful distance away, giving him privacy but staying close enough to offer support. "You saved me," she said softly. "Perhaps that's what they would want. For their loss to mean you could still save someone else." Tom stayed there for hours, saying all the things he'd never gotten to say. "Goodbye. I'm sorry. I love you. I miss you." Eventually, as the colony's sun began to set, casting long shadows across the red dust, he stood up. "Thank you," he said to Kira. "For bringing me here. It was the least I could do." She paused. "My offer still stands. You could come with us. Leave this all behind. Start a new life." Tom looked at the graves one last time, then shook his head. "I appreciate it. But Outpost Kalos is my home now. That repair bay, that quiet life, it's what I need." They traveled back together. When they reached the station, Kira prepared to leave. But before she boarded her ship, she turned to Tom one last time. "The galaxy knows about you now," she said. "About what humans can do. My people are spreading the word. Humanity is not to be underestimated. You've changed how the galaxy sees your species." "I just broke some chains," Tom said. "You broke more than chains." Kira smiled. "You broke assumptions. Broke prejudices. Showed everyone that the newest species in the galaxy might be one of the most formidable. That's a gift to your entire people." After she left, things slowly returned to a new normal. Ships still came seeking the legendary mechanic, but fewer now. Tom went back to his routine, late nights, broken engines, his rebuilt drone keeping him company. But something had changed inside him. The numbness that had protected him for 3 years had cracked, just a little. He'd let himself care about someone again, even briefly, and the universe hadn't punished him for it. He'd done something that mattered. Sometimes now, in the quiet hours before dawn, Tom hummed while he worked. Different tunes. Random melodies. Nothing special. But the sound wasn't sad anymore. And somehow, that felt like healing.